Mom, Dad, you're a burden we can't carry anymore." Those words cut through the air sharper than any knife. I felt them slice deep inside me, leaving a silence so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were mourning. After everything George and I had sacrificed, the nights we worked double shifts, the years we went without so our kids could have more now, in our 70s, we had become disposable. Like old furniture, no longer pretty enough to keep. They said it was for our own good, that moving us to a retirement home would give us better care. But deep down, I knew the truth. They weren't sending us somewhere safe, they were sending us away. Away from their lives, their comfort, their guilt. I looked at George, his hands trembling around his coffee cup, his eyes watery but defiant. He had built this house with those very hands, brick by brick, dreaming of a family that would always stay together. And now, the same children he built it for were ready to throw us out. Have you ever felt like love itself betrayed you? If you've ever watched someone you raised turn their back on you, tell me where you're from or how old you are in the comments, because pain like this knows no borders. And if you believe that love and loyalty still matter in this world, like this video and stay with us. What comes next will challenge everything you thought you knew about family. My name is Margaret Collins, and this story takes place in Boston, Massachusetts. It begins in a modest 2-story home filled with memories, the smell of coffee, Sunday dinners, and laughter that once echoed through every room. But on one quiet morning, that warmth began to fade forever. The smell of coffee always reminded me of home. For 40 years, I started every morning the same way. The sound of beans grinding, the hiss of the old kettle, the faint creak of floorboards as George shuffled into the kitchen in his slippers. It was a ritual, a quiet proof that life was still normal, still ours. But that morning felt different. There was something heavy in the air, something I could not name but could feel pressing against my chest. I was standing by the stove, frying eggs the way George liked them, when I heard footsteps coming down the hall. Quick, sharp, impatient. It was Becky, our oldest. Even before she spoke, I knew from her steps that her mood was sour. She appeared in the doorway still wearing her robe, hair messy, face tight, as if she had been clenching her jaw all night. "How many eggs are you making, Mom?" she asked. Her tone wasn't curious. It was cold, edged with accusation. "4," I said softly. "1 for each of us." She sighed loudly, like my answer was somehow offensive. Then she dropped a pile of papers onto the kitchen table. I recognized them instantly. Medical bills, George's prescriptions. $600, Mom, she said, her voice rising. "Do you realize how much that is? Every single month. I can't keep doing this." I froze, spatula in hand. For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard her right. $600. The number sounded cruel on her tongue, as if it were heavier than love itself. Before I could respond, George entered slowly, leaning on the wall for balance. His steps were small and careful, the way old men walk when they know each step could betray them. His face was pale, his breath shallow, but he smiled anyway. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said to Becky. She didn't look up. She just grabbed a piece of toast, spread it with butter in angry strokes, and muttered, "Morning," before storming off to her room. George stood there for a moment, toast crumbs falling onto his shirt. His smile faded. I saw tears form in the corners of his eyes. That hurt me more than anything, Becky had said. He was a man who had built this very house with his hands, brick by brick, after coming home from construction jobs too tired to eat. This kitchen, these walls, every inch of this home carried his sweat and love. And now, in our own home, we felt like intruders. He sat down at the table. "She's right, Maggie," he said quietly, eyes on his plate. "We're becoming a problem." I turned off the stove. The smell of burned eggs filled the air. "Don't say that," I whispered. "We're family." But the word felt fragile, like glass about to shatter. Moments later, Michael walked in, still in his work uniform from the night shift at the factory. He looked tired, eyes dark, shoulders slumped. He had always been the peacemaker, the one who tried to balance Becky's temper and Danny's laziness. But that morning, even Michael's voice carried exhaustion. "Mom, Dad, can we talk?" he said, sitting down heavily. "This situation can't go on." I felt my heart sink. He rubbed his face with both hands before speaking again. "You've seen the bills. It's not just the medicine. It's everything. The groceries, the utilities, the space. This house isn't big enough for 5 adults." George looked up, trying to sound calm. "We can talk to the doctor, maybe find cheaper medication." Michael shook his head. "It's not just that, Dad. There's a place, a nice one, a retirement home. They have doctors, nurses, activities. It might be better for you two." Enter 7. I felt my stomach twist. I gripped the edge of the counter, my nails pressing into the wood. "Are you talking about putting us away?" "It's not like that, Mom," he said quickly. "It's about making sure you're cared for properly. You'd have people your own age around. You'd have help." Help. That word sounded like exile. Before I could answer, Danny appeared in the doorway, yawning, hair sticking up, still in his pajamas, though it was nearly noon. "Are you guys finally talking about the nursing home thing?" he asked. "Good. It's about time. I can't sleep with Dad coughing all night." George's shoulders stiffened. He didn't look at Danny. He just stared at the table. Becky came back in, now dressed for work. "I already called the place," she said briskly. "They have an opening. We can go tomorrow to take a look." I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I looked at each of them, the children I had raised, loved, nursed through fevers, cheered through graduations, and I realized I didn't recognize them anymore. Their faces were familiar, but their hearts were strangers. That evening, George and I sat in silence. He watched the sunset through the back window, the same view he had admired every day for 50 years. "They have a point," he murmured after a long while. "They don't," I said firmly. "They're just tired. They'll come around." But deep inside, a part of me knew this was the beginning of something I couldn't stop. Days passed, and the tension in the house grew unbearable. The kids avoided us. They spoke in hushed voices behind closed doors. George hardly ate. Every morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach, afraid of what new decision they might have made without us. Then, one afternoon, as I was hanging laundry in the backyard, I heard them talking inside. Their voices were low but clear enough. "It's all set," Becky said. "They're coming to pick them up this afternoon," Michael replied. "What if they don't want to go?" Danny asked. "They'll go," Michael said flatly. "They don't have a choice." I dropped the sheet I was holding. My knees went weak. My children had decided my future without even asking me. I rushed to the garden where George was tending his roses. "They're sending us away," I whispered. My voice trembled so badly that the words barely came out. "They arranged everything. Today—" George froze. The hose slipped from his hand, water spilling over his shoes. "Without telling us?" he said quietly. I nodded, tears burning my eyes. "They don't plan on visiting George, ever." He turned away, shoulders shaking. I knew he was crying, though he tried to hide it like he always did. 2 hours later, a van arrived. 2 women in crisp white uniforms stepped out, all smiles and polite voices. "We're from Sunny Valley Retirement Home," one said cheerfully, "ready to help you settle in." Our children stood behind them, pretending to be sad, promising to visit, promising to call. Empty words, spoken like lines in a bad play. As we were helped into the van, I looked through the window one last time. Becky adjusted her jacket, Michael checked his phone, and Danny lit a cigarette. Not one of them looked back. "George," I whispered, my voice breaking. "How did we end up here?" He held my hand, his eyes glassy but steady. "I don't know, Maggie," he said, "but maybe someday they'll remember who we were to them." The van started moving. The house we had built with our bare hands grew smaller and smaller until it vanished behind a line of trees. That was the moment I realized something terrible. This wasn't just about being unwanted, it was about being erased. And yet, I didn't know that fate had something else waiting for us, something that would change everything. The first night at Sunny Valley Retirement Home was the longest of my life. The air smelled like disinfectant and sadness. The hallways were dimly lit, the kind of light that doesn't illuminate anything, only reminds you of how far you are from home. George and I shared a small room divided by a thin curtain from 2 other elderly couples. One of them cried softly in the dark. The other muttered the same name over and over, like a broken record. George tried to stay strong. "It's just temporary," he whispered. "They'll come visit soon." But even he didn't sound convinced. I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the van's door slam, Becky's cold goodbye, the way Michael had avoided my eyes, and Danny's careless wave. My children, my babies, the same little hands I once held to cross the street, had pushed me into this place and driven away without looking back. Days passed. The staff was polite but distant. Breakfast was bland oatmeal served on plastic trays. The nurses moved like machines. No one called me by my name. I was just room 14. George's health began to slip. He stopped eating. He stared out the window for hours, watching the birds that came and went. One afternoon I found him sitting alone in the corner of the courtyard, his hands shaking. "George," I said softly. He looked up. His eyes were red. "I can't stay here, Maggie. This isn't living." That night, I woke to the sound of him gasping for air. His face twisted in pain as he clutched his chest. "Help! Somebody help!" I screamed. It took almost 10 minutes before a nurse appeared, half asleep, annoyed more than alarmed. "It's probably just indigestion," she said. "It's his heart," I yelled. "He needs a hospital." Hours later, after endless waiting in the emergency room, the doctor told me George had suffered a heart attack. They managed to stabilize him, but he would need close care. I sat beside his bed in the ICU, holding his hand, listening to the monitor beep like a cruel reminder that every second mattered. I tried calling my children. No one answered. I left message after message pleading, crying, begging them to come. Not one of them returned my call. Around dawn, a young nurse entered. She was different, her voice soft, her movements gentle. "Are you his wife?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "We've been married 50 years. She smiled. "That's beautiful. My name's Emily Harris." She adjusted George's blanket and tucked it under his chin with care. "We don't see many couples who've stayed together that long," she said. "You must love him very much." He had an ought-to-be forces with a long of crowd of the Procuses live, that lugs apted with fairy have a ground. I could only nod, afraid that if I spoke, I'd break apart. Emily stayed a while longer than she needed to, asking about our life, about our children. When I told her they hadn't come, her eyes filled with quiet sadness. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "No one deserves that." Over the next few days, Emily became our guardian angel. She visited even when she wasn't assigned to our room. She brought me coffee, asked if I'd eaten, listened when I needed to talk. Sometimes she'd tell me about her husband Ryan, who ran a small repair shop nearby. They didn't have children, but always wanted a big family. One afternoon, as George slept, Emily sat beside me in the hospital room. "Mrs. Collins," she began carefully, "please forgive me if this sounds strange, but would you ever consider living with us?" I blinked, thinking I had misheard. "Live with you?" She nodded shyly. "We have an extra room. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm. I work here so I could keep an eye on your husband. Ryan works from home. You'd never be alone." Tears filled my eyes. A stranger, a young woman who owed me nothing, was offering me kindness my own children refused to give. "Why would you do that?" I whispered. She smiled, a little embarrassed. "Because my husband and I always dreamed of having grandparents around, people who could tell stories, share memories. We miss that in our lives." I covered her hand with mine. "You remind me of who my daughter could have been," I said softly. That night, when George woke up, I told him about Emily's offer. His eyes widened with disbelief. "They don't even know us," he murmured. "Why would they want to take in 2 old strangers?" "Maybe," I said, "because not everyone has forgotten what family means." He smiled for the first time in weeks. "Then maybe there's still hope in this world." The next morning, Emily and her husband Ryan came to pick us up. He was tall and gentle, his hands rough from work, his smile easy. They helped George into the car, loaded our few belongings, and drove us away from the sterile walls of Sunny Valley. As the building disappeared behind us, I looked out the window. I felt like someone who had been rescued from drowning, not yet safe, but finally breathing again. Have you ever been helped by someone who owed you nothing? Someone who stepped in when your own family turned away? If you believe that kindness still exists, tell me in the comments where you're watching from or how old you are, because stories like this remind us that humanity isn't dead. And if you want to see how fate turns this tragedy into something beautiful, like this video, and subscribe to stay with me until the end. When we arrived at Emily's small home, it felt like sunlight itself was waiting for us. She had prepared a room with a clean bed, floral curtains, and a vase of fresh daisies by the window. Ryan had even built a small ramp so George could move around easily. "It's not much," Emily said, "but it's home, and now it's yours too." For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking in fear. I could hear George breathing beside me, steady and calm. The world outside was still uncertain, but in that little house, kindness had found a way back to us. What I didn't know then was that this small act of compassion would set off a chain of events that none of us could ever have imagined. Because hidden deep inside one of George's old jackets was something that would soon change everything, not just for us, but for everyone we thought we had lost. Living with Emily and Ryan felt like stepping out of a storm and finding sunlight waiting on the porch. Their little house sat on a quiet street just outside Boston, surrounded by trees that whispered when the wind passed through. It was small, but every corner felt alive. The smell of Ryan's coffee, the soft hum of Emily's laughter, the warmth that came not from money, but from kindness. George and I adjusted slowly. After the cold sterility of Sunny Valley, this house felt like a miracle. Emily would leave early for her 12-hour hospital shifts, but every morning before she left, she'd make sure we had breakfast ready, scrambled eggs, toast, sometimes pancakes if she had the time. Ryan worked from his garage, fixing old radios and broken appliances. I'd often hear music playing from his workshop while I cooked. George liked to sit near the window, reading the paper aloud just like he used to. For the first time in months, I felt human again, useful, wanted. One afternoon, I decided to do laundry. While sorting through a pile of old clothes, I came across George's brown jacket, the one he used to wear on chilly mornings. It had been hanging untouched since Sunny Valley. The fabric was stiff, and when I reached into the pocket, my hand brushed against something thick, an envelope. Curious, I pulled it out. It was old, yellowed around the edges, and stamped with the name of a law firm I didn't recognize, Bennett and Associates. My heart beat faster. I tore it open carefully, expecting maybe old receipts or forgotten papers, but what I found made my knees go weak. Inside were several legal documents, and at the top of the first page, in bold letters, it read, "Last Will and Testament of Robert Hill." My father. I sank into a chair, my hands trembling. My father had passed away more than 10 years ago. I thought he'd left nothing behind but memories. But according to these documents, he had left me a substantial inheritance, multiple properties in downtown Boston, and a trust account worth over $20 million. $20 million. I read every line twice, barely breathing. There were letters attached to copies of correspondence from the law firm, all addressed to me, all dated years ago. They had been returned, unopened, marked recipient no longer at this address. And then, a realization struck me like lightning. Those letters must have arrived while we were living with our children. They must have intercepted them. When George came home from the garage, I was still sitting at the table, the documents spread before me. "What's all this?" he asked, his face pale as he scanned the papers. "It's from my father's attorney," I whispered. "George, he left us a fortune, and our children knew." He looked at me in disbelief, then anger began to rise in his eyes. "They knew?" His voice cracked. "All this time, they knew we weren't poor, and they still sent us away?" I nodded, tears spilling down my cheeks. "They hid it from us, George. They wanted the money for themselves." For a long time, we sat in silence, the weight of betrayal pressing down like a physical force. The people we had loved most had not only abandoned us, they had stolen our dignity and tried to steal our future. Ryan walked in just then, wiping grease from his hands. He froze when he saw our faces. "What happened?" George handed him the papers. "You might want to sit down," he said grimly. When Ryan and Emily read everything, their reactions were nothing like I expected. There was no greed, no calculation, only shock and then outrage. "This is unbelievable," Emily said, her voice trembling. "You need to talk to an attorney right away. They can't get away with this." "I know someone," Ryan added. "A good man. Charles Bennett, maybe he's even connected to this firm." The next morning, Emily drove us downtown to meet attorney Charles Bennett, a kind-faced man in his 60s with silver-rimmed glasses and a calm, steady voice. When he saw the documents, his eyes widened. "Mrs. Collins," he said, shaking his head, "we've been trying to reach you for years. We even hired a private investigator, but you'd moved from your old address. We assumed you were deceased." George clenched his fists. "Our children must have intercepted the letters." Mr. Bennett sighed. "It's possible. We received several phone calls from people claiming to be your children, asking for information about the estate. Naturally, we refused to release anything without proof of identity." I felt both relief and sorrow at once. Relief that the money was still legally ours. Sorrow that my children had sunk so low. We spent hours at the office signing forms, updating records, and learning about the properties and funds. At the end, Mr. Bennett handed us a temporary bank card. "This gives you access to one of your accounts," he said. "I've set a daily limit of $50,000 until all documentation is finalized." 50,000. It felt surreal. For most of my life, I'd worried about grocery bills. Now, money, something that had torn my family apart, was suddenly back in my hands. On the drive home, George stared out the window. "What do we do now?" he asked quietly. I thought for a long moment before answering. We keep living as we have. Emily and Ryan took us in when we had nothing. They deserve our loyalty. As for our children, we'll see what happens when they find out. He nodded, his jaw tight. And they will find out. People like Becky and Michael always do. He was right. It didn't take long. 2 weeks later, while we were having breakfast, the doorbell rang. Ryan went to answer it. His face changed the moment he saw who it was. "Mrs. Collins," he said softly. "They're here. All 3 of them." My heart pounded. George set down his cup slowly. "Let them in," he said. Through the doorway came Becky, dressed in a tailored coat and jewelry that gleamed under the morning light. Michael followed, his watch glinting, his smile too smooth. Danny trailed behind, looking uneasy but silent. "Mom," Becky said with a fake warmth that barely hit her nerves, "we've been so worried about you." I looked at her and saw no trace of the daughter who once cried when I bandaged her scraped knees. Only calculation. "Worried?" George said evenly. "Did you check the retirement home where you left us, or the hospital where I almost died?" "Dad," Michael interrupted, his tone oily. "Let's not dwell on the past. We're family. We just want to fix things." "Family," I repeated. "You abandoned us, hid letters that were rightfully ours, and you want to talk about family?" Becky sighed dramatically. "Fine. Let's be honest. We know about the inheritance. We just want to settle this peacefully. We're your children. We deserve a share." I stood up, my voice steady. "You're right about one thing. Family deserves to share, but we've already chosen who our family is." Becky's eyes widened. Michael's smile vanished. George took my hand and said quietly, "Family isn't blood. It's the people who stand by you when everyone else walks away." Their faces hardened. Becky turned on her heel. "You'll regret this," she hissed. And just like that, they left the door closing behind them with a final, echoing click. But as the silence settled, I felt no fear, only strength. Because for the first time in a long time, I knew who I could trust. And deep down, I sensed that what had just begun was far from over. 2 weeks passed after the confrontation, but the echoes of Becky's words still lingered in my mind. "You'll regret this." They sounded less like anger and more like a promise. George and I tried to settle back into our quiet life with Emily and Ryan, but peace never fully returned. Every ring of the phone made me flinch. Every unexpected knock at the door sent my heart racing. Emily noticed. "You're still thinking about them," she said one evening while setting the table for dinner. I sighed. "You can't raise children your whole life and just stop caring. Even after everything they've done, they're still my kids." George shook his head. "They made their choice, Maggie, and now we have to live with ours." We ate in silence for a while. Outside, snow had begun to fall over Boston, covering the streets in white. Ryan had put up Christmas lights earlier that day, and their soft glow filled the dining room. For the first time since the inheritance, the house almost felt like home again. But the calm didn't last long. The next morning, a letter arrived. The envelope was thick, stamped with the logo of a law firm. George and I exchanged a look before he tore it open. Inside was a formal notice our children were suing us, demanding control over our estate. They claimed we were mentally unfit to manage our finances. George's hands trembled as he read the words aloud. "They're saying we're incompetent." Emily's jaw dropped. "That's insane. You're both perfectly fine. How could they do this to their own parents?" Ryan stood up and paced across the room. "They're trying to scare you into giving them the money. That's all this is." I felt my chest tighten. What if they win? What if they actually convince someone that we're losing our minds? Emily placed her hand over mine. "They won't. You have us. We'll find a lawyer and we'll fight this." That afternoon, we met again with attorney Charles Bennett. He frowned as he read through the documents. "This is cruel," he he said finally. But unfortunately, it's not uncommon. Children sometimes use the legal system to exploit aging parents. Can they really take everything from us? George asked. They can try, Bennett said, but we'll make sure they fail. I'll need medical evaluations to prove you're both mentally competent, and we'll prepare testimony about your current lifestyle and stability. Trust me, this case will not end well for them. For the next few days, our lives became a whirlwind of appointments and paperwork. Doctors examined us, psychologists interviewed us, and Bennett's assistants gathered every detail about our finances and living situation. Emily helped us through it all, her calm presence anchoring me when panic threatened to take over. Still, at night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the betrayal in my head, the way Becky had looked at me with contempt, the cold tone in Michael's voice, the silence of Danny, who had said nothing at all. Do you think they'll stop after this? I asked George one night as we lay in bed. He didn't answer right away. No, he said finally, not until they've taken everything they think they deserve. A week later, the first hearing was scheduled. As we walked into the courthouse, I felt every eye on us. Becky and Michael were already there, seated with their lawyer. Both looked composed, dressed sharply as if this were a business meeting. Danny wasn't with them. When Becky saw me, she smiled faintly. It wasn't warmth, it was satisfaction. Their attorney stood up and began speaking about elder care concerns and declining cognitive health. He painted us as confused, vulnerable, and unable to handle our finances. My stomach churned with anger. When it was our turn, Mr. Bennett rose calmly. Your Honor, my clients are of sound mind and living independently under their own free will. What we're seeing here is not concern, it's greed. Then he submitted the medical reports. The doctor's notes were clear. Both George and I were fully competent, but Becky's lawyer wasn't ready to give up. He requested more time to gather additional evidence. The judge agreed to another session in 2 weeks. Outside the courthouse, the cold air burned my lungs. They won't stop, I whispered. No, George said quietly, but neither will we. That night, as we sat in the living room, there was another knock at the door. This time it was soft, hesitant. Ryan opened it, and to our shock, Danny was standing there. He looked thinner, tired, almost haunted. Can I come in? He asked. Emily nodded, guiding him inside. He sat down at the edge of the couch, twisting his hands. I don't even know where to start, he said. Mom, Dad, I didn't know how far they'd go. I thought this lawsuit was just talk. George stared at him. And now you're here because you suddenly grew a conscience? Danny looked down. I deserve that, but there's something you need to see. He pulled a small envelope from his jacket and placed it on the coffee table. Inside were printed emails and a USB drive. They're planning something worse, he said. Michael's been talking to a doctor, someone willing to sign fake medical reports saying you both have early dementia. They want to use that in court. Emily gasped. That's illegal. Danny nodded. I know. That's why I took these before they could delete them. I copied everything from Michael's computer, the emails, the payments, even recordings of phone calls. I covered my mouth in disbelief. Why are you telling us this? He hesitated. Because I can't live with it anymore. I went along with everything for too long. I didn't stop them when they sent you to Sunny Valley. I told myself it was for the best, but it was cowardice. I'm sorry. George's face softened, just a little. He stood up, walked over to Danny, and placed a hand on his shoulder. It's not too late to do the right thing, son. Danny's eyes filled with tears. I'll testify. I'll tell the court everything. Ham-salled. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, not all of our children were lost to greed. We called Bennett immediately, and he instructed us to bring the evidence the next morning. This changes everything, he said over the phone. With these files, we can prove fraud and destroy their case. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The snow outside reflected the moonlight through the curtains. George was already asleep, his breathing steady beside me. I wanted to believe this was the turning point, that we would finally be free from their cruelty. But deep down, I knew better. People driven by greed never surrender quietly. And as I drifted into uneasy sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the calm before a much greater storm. The morning of the second hearing felt like walking into a battlefield. George and I held hands as we stepped into the courthouse, our palms clammy with both fear and determination. Danny walked beside us, shoulders tense, but eyes clear. He looked older somehow, as if the guilt of years had carved lines across his face. Inside, Becky and Michael were already waiting. Becky wore her usual expensive coat, her expression composed but hard. Michael's jaw was set, though I could see a flicker of unease when he spotted Danny walking with us. The session began. Becky's lawyer launched into his speech about parental incapacity, repeating the same lies from the first hearing. But this time, things were different. When he finished, Attorney Bennett stood and called the next witness, Daniel Collins. The room fell silent. Becky turned, eyes wide. "What are you doing?" she hissed. Danny didn't answer. He walked to the witness stand, raised his right hand, and swore to tell the truth. And then he told everything. He spoke about the night they decided to send us to Sunny Valley, how Becky called it a solution, how Michael handled the paperwork, and how Danny had stayed silent because he was afraid to stand up to them. His voice broke as he described the intercepted letters, the inheritance, the deception, and finally, the latest plan to fake medical reports. At one point, Becky jumped up shouting, "He's lying!" The judge banged the gavel. "Sit down, Miss Collins," Danny continued, his voice shaking. "I did nothing to stop them. I was a coward, but I can't keep watching them destroy the people who gave us everything." He handed over the printed emails and audio recordings. The room buzzed as Bennett submitted them into evidence. The judge read in silence for a long moment, then looked up. "In my 30 years on the bench," he said slowly, "I have seen greed, but this level of cruelty, coming from one's own children, is beyond words." Becky's face turned pale. Michael's fists clenched on the table. The judge ruled to dismiss the case immediately and ordered an investigation into possible elder fraud and perjury. It was over. I didn't cheer or cry. I just sat there, holding George's hand, feeling a strange mix of victory and heartbreak. Outside the courthouse, Sonia, Michael's wife, was waiting with Ethan and Lily, our grandchildren. She rushed over, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know it would go this far." I hugged her tightly. "You and the kids are always welcome with us." Danny stood a few steps away, staring down at the snow. When I turned to him, he met my eyes hesitantly. "Mom, can I come home? Not just for today. I mean, can I try to make things right?" I felt my throat tighten. "Home isn't a place, Danny. It's people. And you never stopped being one of ours." He started to cry, and I pulled him into my arms. For the first time since all this began, I felt the warmth of something close to peace. But peace doesn't erase scars. In the weeks that followed, we tried to return to normal. Emily and Ryan celebrated with us, cooking a big dinner with candles and laughter that filled the house. For a while, it almost felt like the pain had been worth it, like we had finally reached the end of the storm. But the past has a way of clinging. Becky disappeared from sight after the hearing. No phone calls, no letters, not even angry messages. Michael, on the other hand, began facing the consequences. The fraud investigation moved fast. Bennett kept us updated, his voice steady but grim. "Your son is in serious legal trouble," he said one afternoon. "If he doesn't cooperate, he could be charged with felony fraud." George sat quietly for a long time after the call. "He made his choices," he said finally, "but he's still our boy." I wanted to argue, to tell him that we'd done enough forgiving, but I couldn't, because deep down, I felt it too. A few weeks later, I got a call from Sonia. Her voice trembled. "Mrs. Collins, I don't know what to do. Michael is drinking every night. He lost his job. He says everyone betrayed him. I'm scared." I promised to come by the next day. George insisted on joining me. When we arrived at their house, the once proud Michael was unrecognizable. His face was pale, eyes sunken, the arrogance gone. Empty bottles covered the table. He looked at us like we were ghosts. "You won," he said bitterly. "Are you happy now?" George stepped forward. "This was never about winning, son. It was about you seeing what you became." Michael laughed dryly. "You think I care? Everything's gone. My job, my name, my life. You took it all." "No," I said quietly. "You gave it away." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then he turned his head and muttered, "Get out." We left without another word. I cried the whole way home. That night, George sat beside me in the living room, staring at the fire. "Sometimes," he said softly, "forgiveness is the hardest punishment." He was right. because forgiveness doesn't fix people. It only gives them the chance to fix themselves. Spring arrived slowly. The snow melted, flowers began to bloom again, and for the first time in months, I felt hope taking root inside me. Emily suggested something one morning over coffee. "You know, Mrs. Collins, you and George have helped us so much. What if you used some of that inheritance to help others like you people who've been abandoned, forgotten?" Her words stayed with me all day. That night, I brought it up to George. "What if we built something new?" I asked. "A home, not like Sunny Valley, but one filled with compassion and dignity." George smiled, that familiar spark lighting his tired eyes. "A home where no one feels thrown away," he said. "Yes," I whispered, "exactly that." We didn't know how we would do it yet, but the idea planted itself firmly in our hearts. After everything we'd endured, maybe this was how we could turn our pain into purpose. The next morning, I wrote the name on a notepad, New Dawn Home. And as the sun rose outside, painting the sky with gold, I knew that our story wasn't over. It was just changing shape. It took months to turn the dream of New Dawn Home into reality. George and I poured every ounce of our energy and love into it. We found a large old house on the outskirts of Boston, its white paint peeling and its garden overgrown. Most people saw decay. We saw potential. Emily helped us navigate the permits, and Ryan worked with contractors to repair the roof, install new wiring, and paint the walls. The place slowly transformed from a forgotten building into a warm, welcoming home. George spent his days in the backyard, planting roses and tomatoes while I designed the kitchen, determined that no one under our care would ever eat bland food again. When the sign finally went up, New Dawn Home, I cried. It wasn't just a building. It was redemption, a second chance for all of us who had once been discarded. Our first resident was Mrs. Eleanor Pierce, an 80-year-old retired piano teacher. Her children had placed her in a facility and visited once a year at Christmas. She arrived fragile and silent, clutching an old music book. Within a week, she was playing the piano again, her fingers trembling but graceful. The sound filled the halls with something we hadn't heard in a long time, hope. Then came Mr. Henry Walker, a 78-year-old carpenter who had suffered a minor stroke. His family had left him at a hospital and never returned. When he saw Ryan's small workshop, his eyes lit up. Soon, he was carving again, teaching others to sand and polish. Word spread. Within 6 months, New Dawn Home was full 15 residents, each with a story of abandonment, each rediscovering their purpose. George and I worked side by side every day. He tended the garden, taught others to grow vegetables, and often said, "When you put your hands in the soil, you remember you're still alive." I managed the kitchen, preparing meals with the same care I once reserved for my family. Emily oversaw the medical care, her compassion touching every soul who entered our doors. We weren't just caring for the elderly. We were creating a family, one chosen through love rather than blood. But even as happiness bloomed inside those walls, shadows from the past lingered outside them. Sonia, Michael's wife, began visiting occasionally, bringing Ethan and Lily with her. The children called us Grandma and Grandpa, their laughter echoing through the halls like music. They helped in the garden, played piano with Mrs. Pierce, and brought light wherever they went. However, Sonia came alone. Michael never joined them. His pride and anger kept him away, even as his world unraveled. The fraud case against him dragged on. I wanted to feel indifferent, but I couldn't. A mother's heart doesn't stop worrying, no matter the pain it's endured. One afternoon, I was helping Lily plant daisies when Sonia pulled me aside. Her eyes were tired, her hands shaking. "Margaret," she said softly, "things are getting worse. Michael's been drinking more. He lost another job. I don't even know how to talk to him anymore." I touched her arm. "You're doing your best, dear. Sometimes love means knowing when to stop saving someone who doesn't want to be saved." She nodded, tears brimming. "I'm thinking about leaving. I can't let the kids grow up like this." I didn't judge her. I only hugged her, the way I used to hug Becky when she was a little girl who'd skinned her knees. That night, I told George what she had said. He sighed heavily. "He's spiraling, Maggie. Maybe he has to hit bottom before he realizes what he's lost." We didn't have to wait long. A week later, just as we were finishing dinner at the home, the phone rang. It was late, and I knew before answering that it couldn't be good news. It was Sonia. Her voice was trembling. "Margaret, please come. Michael's been in an accident. They said it was bad." My heart stopped. We rushed to the hospital. The scene was a blur, flashing lights, sirens, the smell of antiseptic. Sonia stood in the waiting room, her face pale and streaked with tears. "He was drinking," she whispered. "He hit a pole." When the doctor came out, his expression told me everything before he spoke. "We did everything we could. I'm sorry." The words shattered something inside me. Despite everything he had done, despite all the pain, he was still my son. I fell into George's arms and cried until there was nothing left. The funeral was small. Becky came, dressed in black, her face drawn and haunted. She didn't speak much. After the service, she approached me with trembling hands. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "Then don't," I said gently. "Sometimes silence says enough." For the first time, I saw real remorse in her eyes. Not anger, not pride, just regret. Back at New Dawn, life went on. The residents needed us, the garden needed tending, and the home continued to grow. Yet the grief stayed. At night, I would wake to the sound of George breathing beside me and think of the son we'd lost twice, once to greed, once to death. Weeks later, Emily found me in the kitchen one evening, staring blankly at a pot of soup. "You need to rest," she said softly. "I can't," I replied. "When I stop moving, I start thinking. In that Medifict." She put a hand on my shoulder. "You built this place to heal others. Let it heal you too." Her words stayed with me. Slowly, I began to find peace in the rhythm of our days, the laughter of residents, the smell of fresh bread, the sight of Ethan and Lily chasing butterflies in the yard. But one afternoon, as I was teaching Lily how to knead dough, I looked out the window and froze. A figure stood near the gate, tall, familiar, hesitant. Becky. She was thinner, older, her eyes tired but clearer than I remembered. For a moment, we just stared at each other through the glass. Then, quietly, she stepped inside. "Mom," she said. Her voice wavered. "Can we talk?" I nodded slowly, my heart both hopeful and afraid. Because while pain had broken us once, perhaps it was about to give us another chance to rebuild. When Becky stepped through the doors of New Dawn Home, it was as if time itself held its breath. For a few seconds, all the sounds around us, the hum of the heater, the soft clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the laughter from the garden seemed to fade. I stood by the counter, my hands still dusted with flour, watching her. She looked older, thinner, her usual confidence stripped away. The sharp edges of arrogance that had once defined her face were gone. Instead, she looked uncertain, even fragile. "Mom," she said again, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I didn't know where else to go." I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even sadness. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes after years of carrying pain. "Sit down, Becky," I said quietly. She sat at the table where I had served so many meals over the years, folding her hands together like a child waiting to be scolded. George entered from the garden, wiping his hands on a towel. When he saw her, he stopped. "Becky," he said evenly, "it's been a long time." She looked down. "I heard about Michael. I came to the funeral, but I couldn't talk to you then. I was ashamed." George nodded slowly but said nothing. The silence between them was thick, full of all the words they hadn't said for years. After a moment, Becky looked up at me. "I've lost everything, Mom. The job, the house, everything. I thought the money would fix my life, but it destroyed it, and I destroyed us." I swallowed hard. "Becky, the money didn't destroy anything. Greed did, pride did, but maybe it's not too late to rebuild." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't know how." "Start by being here," I said. "Stay for dinner, help in the kitchen, listen to the people here. You'll see what we're trying to do." That night, she stayed. She ate with the residents, listened to their stories, and for the first time in years, I saw her laugh, not the cold, practiced laugh she used at business dinners, but a real one, warm and unguarded. After dinner, she helped me wash dishes. As we stood side by side at the sink, she said quietly, "I never understood why you loved taking care of people so much. I thought it made you weak. Now I think it's what makes you strong." I smiled faintly. Maybe we both had to fall apart to see what mattered. In the weeks that followed, Becky began visiting regularly. At first she was hesitant, like a guest unsure of her place, but soon she started helping with the residents' reading to Mrs. Pierce, assisting Emily with the medications, and even joining George in the garden. One afternoon, I found her sitting with Mr. Walker, the carpenter, as he showed her how to sand a wooden jewelry box. Her eyes lit up as she worked. When she saw me watching, she smiled shyly. "He's teaching me patience," she said. George chuckled. "That's something this family could always use more of." Slowly, something beautiful happened. The walls between us began to crumble. Becky didn't ask for forgiveness anymore. She earned it through every quiet act of kindness, every hour she spent caring for those who had no one. But true healing never comes without struggle. One evening, she came to my room, her face pale. "Mom," she said softly, "I've been thinking. I want to work here. Not just volunteer, really work. I want to help you run New Dawn." I looked at her for a long moment. "Are you sure, Becky? This isn't about redemption through work. It's about service. It's hard, it's messy, and sometimes it's thankless." "I know," she said, "but it's the only thing that feels right anymore." George, who had been listening from the doorway, nodded. "If you're serious, we'll give you a chance, but you'll have to earn the trust of everyone here, not just ours." And she did. Day by day, Becky proved herself. She organized community events, connected with local hospitals, and helped raise funds for more beds. Her business skills, once used to manipulate and control, now served a greater purpose. Emily admired her efficiency, and even the residents began to call her Becky dear. It's now their second. One afternoon, while she was helping Mrs. Pierce play the piano, I stood by the doorway, tears filling my eyes. George came up behind me, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. "She's changing," he whispered. "Yes," I said. "She's remembering who she used to be. But not every wound heals cleanly. There were nights when I still woke up and saw Michael's face in my dreams. Sometimes I'd find George sitting outside under the stars, silent and thoughtful. The loss of a child never truly leaves you, it just becomes part of who you are." One evening, Becky joined us on the porch. She looked up at the night sky and said, "Do you ever think Michael would have changed if he'd had more time?" "Bien." George sighed. "I don't know, maybe, but I think he would be proud of what you're doing now." Becky smiled weakly. "I hope so." In the months that followed, New Dawn Home grew. More residents came. The laughter grew louder, the garden fuller. The local newspaper even ran a story about us, the couple who turned Betrayal into a haven for the forgotten. One day, Becky received a letter from the court confirming that the fraud case was officially closed. Her shoulders relaxed for the first time in years. "I can finally breathe again," she said. But just as the light began to return fully to our lives, fate found a way to test us again. It started on a warm summer morning. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when George called out from the garden. His voice sounded odd, weaker than usual. I ran outside and found him sitting on the bench, pale, one hand clutching his chest. "George," I cried, kneeling beside him, "stay with me." He looked up at me, trying to smile. "I'm fine, Maggie, just a little dizzy." But deep down, I knew it wasn't fine. Not this time. Emily came rushing with her medical kit while Ryan called for an ambulance. As the sirens approached, I held George's hand tightly, praying silently. In that moment, surrounded by the people we had built this new family with, I realized something profound. We had turned our pain into something good, but life was reminding me that even goodness doesn't stop time. When they lifted him into the ambulance, George looked at me and whispered, "Promise me, Maggie, keep the home alive." I nodded, tears streaming down my face, because I already knew what was coming next, another chapter, another test of love, and the hardest goodbye of all. The morning after George's collapse felt like the world had gone silent. The corridors of the hospital echoed faintly with distant footsteps and machines that hummed and beeped in rhythm with my heartbeat. I sat beside his bed, his hand warm but weak in mine. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, but even in that frailty, he looked peaceful, as if he already knew what I could not accept. Emily checked the monitors gently, her eyes soft with understanding. "He's resting. The stroke was severe, but he isn't in pain," she said. Then, after a pause, "You should talk to him. He can still hear you." So I did. For hours, I told him everything. about the garden that was blooming, about Becky's new ideas for expanding the home, about Ethan and Lily's piano lessons with Mrs. Pierce. I told him the house was full of laughter again. And then, when words ran out, I simply whispered, "I'm not ready to let you go." He stirred slightly, his fingers tightening around mine. His lips moved faintly. "You already know how to keep going, Maggie," he murmured, his voice barely a breath. "You've always known." That night, surrounded by the quiet hum of the machines, George passed away not in fear or regret, but in peace. The kind of peace only a man who has forgiven everything can know. The funeral was small but beautiful. The residents of New Dawn Home filled the chapel, their wheelchairs and walkers lined up neatly in the aisles. Emily spoke first, her voice trembling as she talked about how George had changed her life, how his kindness had made everyone around him better. Then Becky stood, clutching a folded piece of paper. "My father taught me that strength isn't in how loud you speak, but in how quietly you love," she said, her voice breaking halfway through. "He taught me that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means choosing peace over pain." When it was my turn, I didn't prepare a speech. I just looked at the crowd and said, "George believed in second chances, for everyone, even when I couldn't." After the service, we returned to New Dawn Home. The garden was full of sunlight, the air heavy with the scent of roses George had planted himself. Becky and Ryan had organized something special. Each resident held a small sapling, ready to plant in the backyard. "It's a memorial garden," Becky explained softly. "Every tree we plant will carry a name. His will be the first." As I knelt down to place the roots into the soil, tears blurred my vision. But for the first time, they weren't only tears of loss. They were tears of gratitude for everything George and I had built, for every soul who had found a new beginning in this place, and for the love that refused to die, even when he did. Months passed, and New Dawn Home flourished more than ever. We expanded to include a new wing for seniors with memory loss, funded through a foundation created in George's name. Becky led the administrative side, Emily managed the medical team, and Ryan oversaw maintenance and community outreach. Danny became our workshop manager, teaching residents and local teens how to build things with their hands. The once broken family had slowly rebuilt itself, not perfectly, but with honesty and love. One quiet Sunday afternoon, I sat on the porch, watching Ethan and Lily chase butterflies across the garden. Becky joined me, handing me a cup of tea. "Mom," she said, smiling softly, "do you ever regret any of it? The pain, the years we lost?" I thought for a long moment. "No," I said finally. "Pain teaches us what matters. It's what made all of this possible. Without the darkness, we would have never found the light." She nodded, her eyes shining. "You're stronger than I'll ever be." I smiled. "No, sweetheart, you're stronger because you fell and chose to rise again." As the sun dipped below the trees, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, I looked around me at the house filled with life, at the laughter echoing through the halls, at the memories blooming where once there was only despair. And I realized something simple but profound. We don't get to choose what happens to us, but we always get to choose what we do with it. George and I had been thrown away by our own children, yet somehow, life gave us back more family than we ever imagined. Later that evening, the staff gathered in the dining hall for dinner. The long table was filled with residents, volunteers, and family, real family. I stood up, holding my glass of cider. "To George," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "To every person who's ever been forgotten and found their way home again." The room filled with soft applause and tears. Some of the residents whispered his name like a prayer. I looked around and felt his presence everywhere, in the warmth, in the laughter, in the garden blooming just outside the window. That night, when the house grew quiet and the last lights were turned off, I walked out to the memorial garden. The young trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling like whispers. I sat beside George's plaque and smiled. "You were right," I said softly. "We did it. We turned pain into something beautiful." I stayed there for a long time, until the stars came out, feeling his spirit beside me. And before I went back inside, I whispered one last promise. "I'll keep the home alive. For you, for them, for everyone who still believes that love, real love, never ends."